Back to the Roots Podcast, episode number 1. In our first episode, Brian Wood and myself, Mike Kline, had an opportunity to sit down with David Kline, who's a writer and an Amish bishop within the Plain community in Holmes County, Ohio. We talked about the immigration of the Amish and the Mennonites into the United States, and also the Plain lifestyle, the Plain culture, and of course horse farming and organic farming. It was a very in-depth, interesting conversation, and I really hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, here's David Kline. Enjoy. You're listening to Back to the Roots podcast. I'm Mike Kline along with Brian Wood, and today we're sitting down with David Kline, who's an organic farmer, a member of the Amish Church, and the author of multiple books and editor of the Farming Magazine. And today we want to talk about the immigration of the Amish into America, also along with a little bit of history on the Anabaptist movement. I might want to mention that I'm also David Kline's son, and I'm just really happy that we have the opportunity to sit down here today. So thank you for joining us, David, or Dad. And would you just kind of start with the history over in Switzerland and what kind of caused the immigration into America?
Yes, to go back to Switzerland, well, you're welcome for coming here, but going back to Switzerland, the Amish are all Swiss, are of Swiss origin. Starting there, a part of the Reformation in 1525, we have been called the radical part of the Reformation because we insist upon adult baptism, complete separation of church and state, and opposed to the military, or we're nonviolent. And we have, but because of religious persecution, starting in Switzerland, from both the Catholics and the Protestant churches, our ancestors were invited north into the Alsace part, which was then France, that little spit of land west of the Rhine that exchanged hands many times between France and Germany. But at that time it was in France, invited north by the lords and the princes who owned large estates and needed farm workers, or Gastarbeiter. And as a result of the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648, when around 10 million German people died in the 30 Years of War, and there were only about 3 million left, and they needed workers. So our ancestors moved north into the Alsace and lived in those, rented those estates, sometimes for 30 years, long-term leases, and farmed there. And that is where the farming practices we still adhere or use here in America were started. When they started growing legumes, and that added, they were getting the nitrogen out of the air free, and then they got more hay. They could cut more hay. They could store hay. They could keep animals in the wintertime. Then the straw, it made manure. They hauled manure to the fields. It increased their fertility, and eventually they became known as the best farmers in France. That's one of the Amish leaders there, Jakob Kipferschmidt, was a friend of Voltaire. Voltaire would stop in to visit him occasionally. They were, and then starting, it's interesting. The Amish left Switzerland and they spoke the Swiss German dialect, but after only about 70 years in the Alsace, they picked up the Alsatian dialect, which is today we call Pennsylvania German, and what we still speak today. That's our first language. Of course, all the Amish are bilingual. We speak 2 languages fluently. And then, starting, actually, we have one of my ancestors left that part of Germany, came to Pennsylvania in 1698. He was a single boy, went back home, married in 1706, came back to the United States then, or what was America, in 1708, and then he would be the 10th generation from me. But he came, it was the Kline, his name was Hannes Kline. But most of the Amish started coming in about 1727. Fairly large immigration, small compared to the 10 million that left Europe at that time and came to America. But still, a significant number, came of about 200 family names. That's and then they settled mostly in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, or in also or Berks County, which was northeast of Lancaster County. And then when the American Revolution came on, the immigration stopped, and then resumed very gradually after 1800, because Napoleon, even though the British controlled the seas, Napoleon controlled the ports, and then they couldn't emigrate out of Europe. And then when Napoleon was defeated in 1815, then the immigration resumed, and especially after 1816, after Mount Tomorrow exploded, the volcano, in 1816 was a year without the summer. Without summer, they had frost every month of the year, and almost no crops. The people were looking for a better land, and after 1815-16, a fairly large, what they call the second immigration, came to America. That's where most of the Amish they came to Somerset County, Pennsylvania, then west to Ohio. Here in our community, 1809, to Indiana about 1829. Illinois, Iowa was the last one, 1849. They settled in the Midwest because they didn't want any part of slavery. They felt at that time it's not right for a human to own another human, and that's why they didn't settle in the South. And we were farmers. We brought along that Alsatian rotation of what we had, a 4 or 5 year rotation. You have wheat, and then you interseeded the wheat with hay, and then had it 1 or 2 years in hay, and then the hay was liberally covered, the old hayfield, with manure from the barn, a manure mixed with a source of carp and mostly straw or corn stover, halted the fields, plowed, and that went into corn. And then the following spring, the corn was followed by oats, which was seeded in April, and then plowed again in August, and then wheat was sown in about September 25th, fly-free date. And then, of course, the wheat, there was a grass sown with the wheat in the fall. In the spring, you top-seeded clover and alfalfa in March or early April, and then it was back into hay. So that rotation was followed for years and years and years, up until about 1997, when we started doing more intensive grazing. We left more hay fields and hay longer for pasture and for hay. So we have changed some, but still we still follow. We're great believers in manure, that's homegrown fertility. And then the immigration continued. My grandfather or great grandfather came over in 1854. He was Swiss Reformed. He came over to New York City. He landed on Battery Park, went to Albany, west from Albany to Buffalo on rail, and from Buffalo to Cleveland on steamship, and from Cleveland to Navarre, Ohio, Navarre on the canal, and from Navarre to Berlin to this community on horse-drawn wagon. But that was in 1854, and the Amish immigration to America continued until up to 1913, when the last few stragglers came over. And the ones that stayed assimilated into the last Amish church in Europe became Mennonite in 1937 in Ixheim, Germany. But even at that time, they had very few of the distinctive, how should I call it, traditions that the Amish have in America. They had mostly lost it. So, but then here in America, everybody's will tell you that we came for religious freedom. That is true, but we also came that we could have our own farms, that we have deeds, because in Europe we could not own our farms. Here we could. And all the early settlers in this community are buried in little cemeteries, owned their own farms. That was the first deeded land they had, and they treasured it. And we have been here since 1809, and so we have what started out with one church. The Amish church districts, we say church districts because we have no church houses. We still have what they call a house church. We have services in the home every 2 weeks. and this rotates. Every church district will have about from 20 to 45 families. Once it goes beyond 45 families, it's divided into two districts, usually by a road or sometimes a fence line, occasionally a power line. People north of the power line would go to one church south of the power, and the bishop determines where the division line is, because when you bring that up to committee, they'll never decide on where the line will be. So one person has to decide that.
So how many church districts are there in the Holmes County community now?
In this larger community, which is about 5 counties, Wayne, Holmes, parts of Tuscarawas, Coshocton, and Knox, I guess, a little bit. But around 220. Around 220 church districts, and we say we have, well, every church district probably has close to 150 people, so it's a fair amount of people. Our population doubled in the last 17.5 years, so we have a very young population. Half of our people are under the age of 20. We have this community has about 900 births a year. That's not the sorts of Amish, the most conservative group, which is not included in this, what we call the Amish Church Directory. About 900 births a year and 80 or 90 deaths. So you see how the ratio is. So there are a lot of farmers coming on.
So in the early 1900s, when did the Amish Church decide to not use tractor power for farming, and also stuck with the horse and buggy versus the automobile? Was that in the early 1900s?
That's a very interesting question, and it was this decade, 100 years ago, from about 1910 to 1920, when those decisions were made. One was to stay with the draft horse for field traction. We used a tractor they used a steam engine to thrash for sawmills and everything, but not for actual plowing. Abraham Lincoln, this just comes to my mind, Abraham Lincoln visited a farming exposition in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1857, before he was president, where they demonstrated the steam engine to plow. And Abraham Lincoln remarked to his aide, "What will happen to our rural communities?" He saw it in 1850. Our leaders saw it 50 years later, 60 years later. But they made the decision. The Amish and the Old Order Mennonites are the only groups from Northern Europe, from any, that have attempted to control wealth by, putting restrictions on. But by staying with the tractor, they decided to stay with the draft horse. They decided to stay with the standardbred or the horse and buggy for transportation, not the ownership of automobiles, even though we ride with automobiles. There's nothing wrong with the automobile. The Amish were concerned what it does to the church, and that's also the community. So they decided to stay with the automobile, not electricity from the high line or from the wire, from the grid, you might say. We have more solar panels in this community than anywhere else in Ohio. We have a lot of alternative energy, and also not the telephone in the home we prefer face-to-face communication. Even though that's being crowded, I'm sure, and I don't know how long that will hold out. But there were some other areas. For instance, we didn't go to college. We ended with 8th grade education. And not that we think colleges are wrong or college education is bad. For our people, we felt it works better with the equal. With starting out, everybody's at least a starting gate with the same level of education. And your whole lifetime is an education. Every day is that you make a discovery, a new word, or you find out. I just found out that new foot-hog pigs don't root. And that to me is perfect for organics. You don't have to put rings in their noses, which you shouldn't do anyhow. But so we have, yes, as I said, those decisions were made, and we have pretty well stayed with those decisions. There are many, many miles in our community that have no electric lines along the road. To me, I think it adds greatly to the beauty of the community not to have those. We put up with a lot of ugliness for comfort. And so that's, of course, many decisions have been later, but those were the major decisions.
And excuse me. So farming has changed significantly in the last 100 years, with a certain amount of technology coming in, even though you still use horsepower, but there's been a lot of advancement in agriculture with even though you use the horse farming, there's still a lot of advances that have been made with the pipeline for milking and the milking parlors, the power units for the discbines and all that stuff. Was that a conscious decision that the church made to allow that, or was it just kind of an evolution?
Well, probably a little bit of both. It was a conscious decision by some churches to allow it. Others, it just sort of had to happen. We have, for instance, the manure spreader. Now, this is a story that was told to me that the manure spreader was frowned upon because everybody used to take their manure out on a sled, unload it, and spread it by hand. And then this guy, this old single school teacher in Coldwater, Ohio, came up with the idea of making a self-unloading manure spreader. He called it a new idea. And the local dealer here, he brought a manure spreader, he took it out to a farm, invited neighbors in to watch it work. And he had a load of manure on it, and supposedly, this is, and I can say this because I'm in this position, but anyhow, as the bishop walked behind the machine, somebody slapped a horse on the rump, and they started going and spread the manure over the bishop. And the bishop said, "We need that machine." And so he was allowed. That was just one. They worried about the windmill to pump water. They were worried about pumping on Sunday. That you're asking God to work on Sunday. But eventually, we never had lightning rods because it felt if God wants to strike your barn with lightning, let him. Don't try to put. And that was fixed by itself when there were a lot of slate roofs. My mother could remember for one time between Benton and Berlin, about 4 miles, during one severe lightning storm, 14 buildings burned to the ground, struck by lightning. The slate roofs were replaced by steel roofs and metal downspouts, and people would say, "Oh, lightning struck the cistern." Well, what happened? Lightning struck the roof, followed the water into the downspout, and ground it out in the cistern. So the problem was fixed by itself in time. And even though we still don't allow lightning rods, very few barns burn down by lightning anymore because of the steel roofs. And there were other decisions made. The Amish have always resisted what we call an ordinance letter or brief, writing down all our decisions we make or anything that's not allowed, because it's not like the Constitution. We wouldn't look at that our kind as fixed. It's alive and it moves around. We always sort of say, somewhat jokingly, that if we write a letter like an ordinance, we have to include a bottle of liquid paper, white out, because we do make changes. It's a lot is determined by the economy. If the price of land determines many of our decisions. So it got to the point where milking machines were allowed, bulk tanks were allowed, the hay binds were allowed, or disc binds with power units. I can remember all those decisions were made. The corn picker, the baler. We've had bicycles as long as I can remember. But on the farm, there's still even with the horse, with the new undercollar or the underpad for the collar, some kind of foam, neoprene foam. Hardly ever do the horses get sore shoulders anymore. So that is new technology. We use the technology of the knowledge of the veterinarians, the agronomists, the entomologists. All that is available to us, even though we farm with horses.
So one thing that I found interesting about what you just said there is that nothing is written down as far as the rules, which might explain why you mentioned having hay binds and the pipeline. But if you go to some communities, they don't allow that. So that not having things written down, does that allow for some churches to make different decisions and some of the differences between communities?
I think you're right, Brian. If it's written on paper, it's very hard to change. If it's not written, if it's oral, you should say, I know in northern Indiana, you can ask Pete on this, but I know where my wife's first cousin is a minister there, and at one time, the Indiana were very conservative with their farming technology, and they if I'm right here, they allow the milker, the bulk tank, I think the corn picker, and the hay bind, and the ministers were together for a conference. They agreed on that. usually every decision we make in church is unanimous, 100%. Every decision. So they did not vote with the church or ask the church. They just told the church. We ministers were 100% agreed to allow these items. They told the church, and then it was in.
And then also, so just to background here, Mike, as he mentioned, is your son. So he grew up within this community, whereas myself, I did not grow up Amish. I did not grow up in a community around Amish. I did not grow up farming, so a lot of this stuff is new to me. But just a follow-up question there is, as far as the decision-making within the church, the bishops get together and they decide on whether a hay bind or a certain technology should or shouldn't be allowed, and then they also, to my understanding, then they allow the churches to then make the decisions within those individual churches whether or not they're going to allow that specific technology.
You're right. We have like an annual meeting of the bishops here. They're like we're part of the old order. There are like 160 bishops. We get together, and we basically try to stay within, let's say, the same ball field. But still, a lot of those decisions are then left up to the individual congregations, and every congregation has a bishop. And our term of bishop is every district that has 20 families will eventually have a bishop, 2 ministers, and a deacon, what we call a plural ministry. And that idea to have 4 is it sort of quenches the ambitious clergy, you might say, liberal or conservative. So one person cannot take the church the direction he may like to because there are 3 other ministers that also have a word in the decision. So it helps keep it balanced, you might say. But yes, a lot of there might be a very conservative church right next to a fairly liberal church, and they go back and forth in fellowship.
I've noticed that in working with different farmers that are all in the old order, it seems the northern part of the community is the more liberal, and then the further south you get in this community, the stricter they are on their farming rules and regulations, and it's really interesting to see the difference. They're in the same church, but the churches can make their own decisions with what the bishops came back. It's really, really kind of neat to see.
And it seems to work. And I like to see that because we accept. Many times when young people get married, I hear a bishop tell the young couple when we try to give them marriage instructions, that no, you may be moving into a community that does not have the same ordinance or rules or bylaws we have. You do what they say, not what we said. You live under their what they are agreed on, and I'd like to see that because we have. Even though they may more consider what we were so reluctant to let go with the farming technology is, at one time our people we were almost all farmers, and everything we farmers do is out for everybody to see. We work out if we go out in the field, if we go with the tractor, all the neighbors will see it, and now only about 15% of our people are farmers or retired farmers. And we shift to an industrial Amish, more where there are shops. It's not so visible. And that's why some of the churches sort of cling to the more stricter rules because it was so easy to manage compared to what we have now. I would say probably, as far as technology goes, the cell phone has been by far the most difficult we ever faced.
So again, back to that, I didn't grow up in the Amish community, and so I might ask some dumb questions. And so one of the terms that you said that I'm not fully clear on is old order. Old order, and I understand there's new order, and what are the differences?
The old order Amish, or the old order name was given after starting about 1865 to 1880, there was a division among the Amish from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, all the way to Iowa, where they where about 2/3 of the people went with the progressive movement that eventually, by the late 1800s, joined the Mennonite church, called Amish Mennonites for a while. And then the people that didn't go were eventually, they wanted to keep the Ordnung. And now today, Ordnung or Ordnung is sort of looked at as what we don't allow in farming, what we allow in farming, how we dress. But it meant the older way of the traditional way of looking at salvation. Where with the Methodist Great Awakening and through the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther said we're saved by faith alone. John Calvin said by grace alone. And the Anabaptists never quite looked at it. That we never so sharply divided our faith from our works. And so they wanted to keep that, and it eventually became the Ordnung, which is German for the old standard, became called the Old Order. Usually by those names are given by sociologists who have to fit us in somewhere. And so that's the Old Order. And today, excuse me, we have there's a Swartz Trooper group that was the first group to here in our community, starting about 1810 to 1820, they split off. Again, I have a friend who calls it Newton's law of theology. For every action, there's a reaction. And starting about that time, a branch went off from the Amish out here, and it's called Pleasant View. They became Amish Mennonite then, and they picked up the Protestant view of salvation, where it's sort of very individualistic, the way we're saved, and where the others from the same family, the Swartz family, reacted to it and started the ultra-conservative Swartz Church because they were reacting to it. They were afraid of it. They didn't understand it. They didn't see eye to eye, so they went to the opposite extreme from what one brother in the family went. And that started the Schwarzenegger group. Then in about the 1940s to the 50s, we called what we called the Andy Weaver group. Again, part of them were part of the Schwarzenegger, left, and then went sort of back and formed a group that was, a lot of this has to do with the strict excommunication and shunning, where if somebody leaves the church, they're excommunicated and then avoided. No social dealings with them, no eating together. And that is, the more conservative groups practice that. The main group of Old Order, if somebody is a member of another church in good standing, then they aren't shunned anymore. They can be a part of the family. Usually that's the way it is. There are exceptions, but that's the way it's expected to be here in Holmes County. Because when the Schwarzenegger division was 100 years ago, we had bishop advisors from Indiana and Illinois coming here. And that's what they told us. The minister agreed to it, and now that's what we still follow. Their advice, they become a member of, say, for instance, the Mennonite church that uses the same confession of faith, which is written in Dort, Holland in 1632, and that's what we still use. In that, if they use that and they're still in the Anabaptist family, you might say, then they aren't shunned. It's kind of, and also just getting to swearing. Right now we have in church, we use the same scriptures all year. They're seasonal, and right now we have the Sermon on the Mount that says swear not at all. So we would never. I mean, this is not take an oath. We wouldn't swear. Very interesting. When Franklin Pierce was nominated president, or when he was inaugurated, I guess that's the name. When he became president, he did not swear. He affirmed, and he did not swear on the Bible. He chose not to, and that's the way we do. And also, the Amish had an influence on our Constitution because of our insistence on complete separation of church and state. Influenced James Madison, and he insisted that's in the Constitution. He did not let go until that was accepted or adopted. So we have a little bit of part in this. And we still believe in that. It's it's the kingdom of God and the kingdom of this world. So we won't go into that.
That's really interesting. I never heard that. The Amish had an influence on the Constitution.
After James Madison, he just did not. He had some of Queens around Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and he said it's working for them, and we want it for everybody.
So that is one thing that I wanted to go back to was Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Why there? Do you have any idea? Was it the terrain?
It was. And that's the first immigration, starting about in the 1720, we call the first immigration. They came over there, and it was, they say Lancaster County, Pennsylvania is like a hen's nest from Lancaster to Ephrata to Intercourse. Those are three cities. And there's the ground, so it's some of the best soil in the world. In 1984, I remember reading this years ago, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, it's a large county. It's a lot of agriculture, a lot of dairies, but a lot of Amish Mennonite farms had more gross agricultural income than 11 complete western states. Not combined, but individual states, more in one county in the east.
So going back to, the immigration into Lancaster County, would that terrain and that land have been very similar to where they immigrated from?
The Alsace, very similar. We had, and when the second immigration came, they felt Lancaster County was already too crowded. They skipped Lancaster, came to Somerset, which is a very high elevation. I know one farmer, one Amish farmer in Lancaster, in Somerset County, told me I have the highest producing herd in Pennsylvania. I was really duly pleased with his success, and he said, my cows produce at 2,500 feet elevation. He had that, and that was the limiting factor of Somerset County, is the high elevation and the sort of limited space. And then they bounced into Somerset, and then on west to Ohio, to Indiana, to Illinois, to Iowa. And as said before, they settled in the heart of the Midwest. And again, the soil, the early immigrants, were fairly well trained in botany, because they could look at the trees and they could tell what kind of soil it was. And we looked at the thriving community here is huge white oak trees, and they liked that soil. It's a limestone soil. That's where they wanted to settle in, and it was. They worked hard, but they made it flourish.
So let's go into agriculture a little bit and the influence, or the, everybody thinks of the Amish, they're all farmers. And you went into that about 15% of the population are now farmers, but it does play a big, role in the lifestyle of the Amish. And can you talk a little bit about the thoughts behind agriculture and its influence on the family and it allowing to work with the family?
I've always been, and that's the reason we publish Farming Magazine, is to have a positive voice for small-scale agriculture, because it works so well for families. For instance, we farm with horses. We unhitch at 11:30. We put the horses, we give them water, we put them in the barn, we feed them, we go to the house, we eat with the family. We rest for an hour and a half. At 1 o'clock, we go get the teams out. We go back to the fields. So it's a very, and then we unhitch at 4, a little after 4. Now we used to start milking at 5 or 5:30. Now everybody starts about at 4:30 because they milk more cows. And then we come in, unless it's really necessary for hay or anything. We unhitch the horses when we come in at 4 o'clock, or unharness the horses. I mean. They're fed, they're turned to pasture, and the rest of the evening everybody can do what they want to do. And then the summer evenings are long. So but agriculture, farming is such a nice way for a family to live, especially an Amish family. The work is shared. It is up until about 1960, 63. The laying flock was the bread and butter of the farm, and then that went with the cage layers and the supermarkets. Next to go with, like the broilers, the small broiler flock, then the turkeys, and then the pigs. Now we're down to dairy, and for conventional farming, and it's very tough. But organic has given us a lot of. We're very happy. We're just very happy to be a part of the Organic Valley Dairy Co-op, be producing milk. And because I always say, Elsie and I will be married 50 years next year, and we've never in our life have bought milk or eggs or broilers. We've always we've always had it. So, and that is just a part of good living, and I call it right living. It's where, but not we don't have enough land for everybody to farm. Land prices are extremely high. And some are moving out, like our daughter and son-in-law moved to New York so they can have farming communities. It's like a little bit of a two-edged sword. You know, there are a lot of benefits. There are also some negatives.
And you mentioned the birth and death rate earlier, the birth rate being much higher than the death rate, so the community is growing. And one question I had was, do you know the size of the overall Amish community throughout the entire United States?
I think they say around 300,000 to 400,000 Amish. And here in our community, it's interesting. There are two brothers who are bishop. Aiden lives on the far northeastern corner around Mount Eden. His brother Levi lives down in Clark. Aiden told me from my door to his door it's 34 miles. That would be, angling across the community. So that's about the size of the community here is 34 miles. You know, that would be probably about 25 miles in diameter, or maybe 30 miles in diameter. Actually, probably about 34 miles in diameter because that could be a circle.
Now you're seeing more and more people that are kind of pushing the outer limits. You see, especially the ones that want to farm, you see them buying farms down toward, which would be Coshocton, which is the very southern edge, and they keep expanding it, especially if they want to farm, because if you look at Berlin, central Holmes County land prices are between $20,000 and $30,000 an acre. So if they do want to farm, they're having to kind of expand the community in order to do it.
That is happening, and you're very right. And the southern part of the community is not running into big cities. Up here in the northern part, we run into Route 30, we run into the larger cities, the industrial cities, and it's not suitable for our people to live there. But in the southern part of the community, they're going down into Coshocton County. It's rural, it's hilly, it's rugged, but it's a place to live and run farm, especially grass farming. And I always say they can go all the way to the High River, they can jump the river, go all the way to the eastern coastal plain without being stopped by large cities. So it's very, very fortunate for our community to have that, what I call the southern door.
Well, I don't think it's just this community either. I think one of the things that, especially Lancaster County with land prices increasing, and here in Holmes County the land prices increasing, there's also whole new communities popping up, in Kentucky and as you said, New York and Michigan, all over the place.
There are new communities cropping. I think they say a new community crops every week, but it's becoming harder and harder because you simply have to move to the fringes in marginal agricultural land to be able to afford it. And if you live in a marginal agricultural land, you simply it's not the Midwest. It's not the heart of the Midwest. You simply have to work harder to make ends meet. But if the land prices are cheaper, you have an advantage there. You don't have to pay as much.
So one direction I kind of want to go now is to maybe have you talk about some of the myths that are surrounding the Amish and how backwards you are and how shut in you are, and a lot of the questions that you hear are, I think, ridiculous, but I have to look at it from Brian's perspective, where you don't have any background or knowledge of the growing up in the community. Like, for one, do Amish people vote?
Yes, they do vote, but on a very small scale. And I must say the Amish are probably very conservative overall, because they loved Abraham Lincoln. He released the slaves, and Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and they just have been Republican ever since because of that. But as far as voting on a national election, I'm a little reluctant to, because the president is Commander-in-Chief of the Army, and if we oppose violence, we're opposed to. I was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, even though I was drafted. All the Amish boys were drafted. None of them were in college, so we all went, except a few, the Flatfoots, that didn't pass the physical examination. And so we worked in mental institutions. We worked on mostly in hospitals. I worked in a hospital in Cleveland for 2 years for my service, so for my 2 years. And so we do. Because of that, how could I vote for a president who's Commander-in-Chief of the Army? for myself, I just couldn't do it. Even though, I prayed for him, but I couldn't vote for him. As far as locally, the Amish probably used to vote more before they had to be registered. Local issues mostly. Local school issues, mental health issues, for maybe county commissioner, trustees. My uncle served on the public school board for 20 years in Berlin Township. So they, until about 25-30 years ago, there was the last Amish on the local public schools. They just sort of dropped out. And then the same way with now, nobody called us for jury duty. The local people just flipped out our names when they came up, and they found out that wasn't quite legal to do. And now they call us for jury duty, so it's just nice not to be a registered voter. They'll call you, so then they have to find an exemption for it.
And I had talked to you earlier about the origins of no mustache, and I find that kind of interesting because that's something that you can really, a physical appearance that you can really see that separates the Amish from the Mennonites is the mustache. So where did the no mustache originate from?
Well, there are quite a few theories on it, but the one I like is we were from Switzerland, and at one time, Switzerland, even today, there's I won't need to do it, but the Swiss military and the Amish were so opposed to the military that the Swiss military, they all had mustaches, just mustaches, bushy mustaches. And it's like a 300-year-old protest against the military. We have no mustaches. But we do have the beard. I can't give you a clear-cut answer to that, but I like that one. I think that sounds about as logical as any.
And I like that story too. And now, one of the other, I think, misconceptions is that the Amish don't pay any taxes either.
No, we're exempt from paying income tax. No way. We pay real estate tax, a lot of it. We pay income taxes. I always said while we were farming, when Mike was a little boy here, and when we had to pay income taxes, I was happy because with 5 to 7 dependents, and we were still paying income taxes, it showed we were making money. We were gaining, and I always felt if we want a civil society with good roads and good bridges and schools and everything, we need the fire department. We need to pay taxes. We should be willing to help pay for that, and I still believe that. And we are exempt from paying Social Security if we're self-employed. And we have, which we are, and then we have never will get a penny from Social Security. We have, that's not so unusual. All our congressmen are exempt from paying Social Security because they have their own retirement fund. The Ohio school teachers are exempt from paying Social Security because they have their own retirement fund. So in a sense, we have our own retirement plan, which is we care for our older people. Once they need help, somebody from the home farm or the home place will care for them. They all will share in helping them. So we are. So you still see Amish working. My brother is 84 and he still works part time. And so we sort of say with a smile that the Bible never talks about retirement.
So another question as a follow-up to Mike asking about no beard, but does still have no mustache, but still have the full beard. Is there an explanation behind that as well?
Well, I can't really give you. It is we believe that Christ had a beard, and he was in Isaiah. The prophet writes that they plucked the hair of his cheek. They plucked the hairs of his cheeks, and my guess is he had a beard instead of just long sideburns. So we try to use Christ, look at Christ not as just our Savior that He died for our sins, but also an example on how to live. And that's why we treasure the Sermon on the Mount so much, because he teaches us so much how to live. Go the second mile. If somebody strikes on one cheek, turn the other cheek, and it's just that's how we try to live. Even though we fail, that's how we try. And I see that in your co-op. They practice the Sermon on the Mount. I really like to see that. I like it.
I think one of the other misconceptions that just popped up was in your talking there is that the Amish are going to try and evangelize, and if you get around them, they're going to try and make you Amish too.
Yeah. Watch out, Brian. You're out against it. We believe more, instead of sending evangelists out, is to be the city on the hill, where and not just one candle is shining; it's a whole city of light, and this is the community, the church. And you read in Matthew there in the Sermon on the Mount that let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven, which is in heaven. Not your works, but they see you, and give the Father the credit. And one candle will not be a city. And also, a candle doesn't make noise. It's quiet. And also, if you take the candle outside on a windy day like today, it needs a globe for protection. And that's the community, the church. And you, in a sense, could say the cooperation of other people, and that's the globe, and that will help that light from being snuffed out by we might say, the winds of modernity. And we have so we are maybe like the Benedictine monks I read recently, where they would never try to evangelize somebody, but you can see Christ in their faces, and that's the way we want to be an example for Christ. And not try to shove. We'd be very, very uncomfortable trying to shoving our religion down anybody's throat. That's not right. Because it's a choice they have to make. If there's something in our life that a non-Amish person would like to adapt to his way of living, we're happy, but we would not insist on it.
Okay, so one question I had was, I think kind of the perception of a lot of people is that Amish is the religion. They don't understand that Amish is the lifestyle. It is not the religion. So what is the religion, and can you explain that a little bit better?
I guess they would look at it as Amish as a religion. We are Christians. I like what the old obituaries used to say. He lived out his Christian faith as a member of the Amish church. So that would be fairly accurate, because we are Christians. We are called Amish because one of our early leaders, it was really given to us sort of in a derogatory way. Amish, named after Jacob Amman, was one of the first leaders, or an early leader who sort of insisted on the strict shunning, and then the other side named us Amish, sort of they meant it to be sort of mean. Well, in America, in Europe, they never called themselves Amish. They called themselves Mennonites or Mennonites, because they were actually closer to Mennonite than the other Swiss brethren, because they had accepted the Dordrecht Confession, which was Dutch Mennonite, a lot of, and North German. Yes, and then as far as we are a New Testament church, all our scriptures we read in Sunday in church are New Testament. We are very familiar with the Old Testament. We use that, the creation, the patriarchs, the Psalms, the prophets. We use all that, but the only Bible we have in our church services and have for hundreds of years is the New Testament, which and has Psalms attached to it. We love Psalms, but we are and over 60 of our scriptures, 60% of the scriptures we read are out of the Gospels. We're a gospel-centered church, and that's we do have in our hymnal is the oldest continuous used hymnal by any. We're sort of, they call us Protestant. We're not fully Protestant, but that's where they lump us. And it's since 1565 our Ausbund has been in use. And we still use that in church. No notes, martyr stories, and just hymns about the skylark, and the beautiful hymn that we sing about the song of the skylark. And we use it only once a year when we read Matthew 13, that when the sower went out to sow, and that's always in the spring when we're sowing. So the scriptures are all connected to the seasons, which shows that our rural agricultural background.
So, last question for you. I think one of the biggest things we wanted to, in doing this entire podcast, was to make folks comfortable with the Amish and show that they should be comfortable with the Amish. So, I think the last question is just going to be, one of the misperceptions is that the Amish are stoic and don't have any fun and are unaccepting to outsiders. And can you just go into some of those misperceptions?
There are a lot of misperceptions. Of course, I live in a larger community, we live in the largest Amish community in the world. But almost every Amish family has what we call English. Anybody who's not Amish is English. Friends who stop in, they may be buying eggs, they might be buying strawberries, but they're just friends. And we're very comfortable with people that are not of our, might say, religion. We read a lot, we're very aware of what's going on in the world. We have our bookmobile has the largest circulation of any bookmobile in the world because we read. We read odds that our daughters who were after they graduated from school, they were school teachers for some years, and they would probably read a book a day. So we are very, very well read. We have the Amish have a great sense of humor, but since we don't have television or even radio, so we have a lot of we tell stories and we just laugh at the same stories, and we have to remember that the Celts lived in Switzerland. Their stone cairns are still up in the Alps, and my guess the Celts. We all know the humor and the twinkle in the eyes of the Celtic people, the Scottish people, or whatever where the Celts were, but they weren't in Switzerland just for the scenery. So the Amish or the Swiss have a much keener sense of humor than the North Germans do. The Prussians are very serious. It takes a lot to make them laugh. At least that's what I hear. And the same with language. Our dialect is a soft-edged German. Low German, or not low. Low is north to Holland, low. But the Prussians, even the Germans say, is so harsh it makes your ears bleed, where ours is much softer German. It has round edges instead of sharp edges. But we have, we laugh a lot. And we may appear stoic when you're going down the road in the buggy, but the horse knows his way. You don't have to pay a lot of attention to driving. Your mind can be 1,000 miles away, and you might look, hey, that guy is very sober. Well, you don't know what he's thinking. At least he's probably not on the cell phone.
And this time of the year, he's probably freezing his butt off, too.
Yeah. We have some protection. We have curtains to roll down. We have a glass front. Not all the Amish do. But, and we have heavy ropes. And the older you get, the less you go. You just stay at home. Home is where they have to take you in, as Robert Frost said.
Well, thank you so much for doing this with us today, and hopefully we'll be invited back for maybe some more once we get this a little more refined.
You're welcome. And yes, I don't know if this is recorded or not, but you're welcome back anytime.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dad. I really enjoyed this. I think a lot of people will find this really interesting. So thank you.
Thank you, David.